We're going to start our second session. First, we'd like to thank our sponsors for this session. That's Hudson Group Tucson, Moderator Engineering, and also the Armstrong Consulting, Inc. So, hope everyone's had a good lunch. I'm going to go ahead and get right started, and I'll pass the mic over to Andy.
Flintstones, meet the Flintstones. They're the modern Stone Age family. From the town of Bedrock, they're a page right out of history. Let's ride with the family down the street, through the courtesy of Fred and Pete. When you're with the Flintstones, have a yabba-dabba-doo time, a dabba-doo time. We'll have a gay old time.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andy Swanson, Palo Alto airport manager, and welcome you to the Flintstones Meet the Jetsons. With me today, I have Rodney Boggus from, sorry, Rodney, I probably didn't pronounce your name quite right there, from RS&H, Gene Reindel from HMMH, and Brittany Kohler from the National League of Cities. And I'm going to kind of sum it up for you guys right now. I'm definitely Fred. So I'm going to learn here today with all of you how this all kind of came together and looking at and trying to reach out to the airports, tie together what's going on and what direction we're going with technology, with UAVs, and just what our buildings should be looking like, and not building the past buildings and building the future. I think I have the right people up here to give you some insight to that, and I'm just going to roll right into that and start with Roddy.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I feel like I really don't belong on this panel, so you can be the judge on this. I've actually had to learn quite a bit to be on this panel with my fellow panelists, and so we're going to tell a story here a little bit, and I'm going to start off on the facilities side on our airport facilities, naming mainly the terminal facilities. You know, what are we doing today that's looking toward 2030 as opposed to taking our clues from 1980? I did a little exercise and looked back at what our terminals look like, particularly the processing type of the terminals from the 1970s, even the 60s in black and white. And if you look, for instance, pictures at Sky Harbor back in the day, it's pretty much the same process that we have today. You had the check-in. You may have had security at some point during the time, always a magnetometer. You had, the bags going to the bag belts. You had the hold rooms looking the same. And when we look at our airports today, outside of maybe we've gotten rid of ashtrays, we've replaced them with electrical duplex outlets. The function of our terminal facilities that the people use when we talk about passenger experience really remains the same. We haven't renamed much of these things, and the processes have changed. We put in kiosks as we've got a little more electronic, and now we do a lot of things with our phones. But what changed? We talk a lot about the passenger experience. Are we talking about the Spirit passenger, which many times involves law enforcement nearby? Or are we talking about the Emirates Air passenger that has their own check-in and lounge facility and boards through their own jet bridge to Emirates flight? So that aspect of what the passenger experience is the question that I have. We've talked about where do we go in the future now? TNCs, we spend a lot of time talking about TNCs, transportation network companies, and we talk about how they're impacting our parking revenue, which up until just recently has been always increasing and keeping in line with growing flight patterns. Now, in many airports, that's not the case. And some airports, 40 or 50% of non-aeronautical revenue come out of parking. So we have TNCs, the constriction they're placing on the curb. We've got, we're taking a VIG off of them when they come on the airport. So airports are making anywhere from $600,000 a month up to $2 million a month on taking their share out of the TNCs. What would happen to the airports out there if you lost that VIG that you're taking from the TNCs. Have you thought about that? You're losing, many people losing parking revenue, many people losing rental car revenue. If that revenue stream of TNCs went away, what would you do? What if an airline, let's just say, what if American Airlines and Uber got together and called it Uber Airport, and they bought a certain amount of transportation from Uber, so that the passengers on the one ticket ride, and we've heard this happen many times before, the passengers, when Roddy goes to buy his ticket to Tucson, they say, "Hey, Mr. Boggus, we'd like us to pick you up at your house and bring you home for an additional $60. I go, "Yeah, that'd be great, because it's going to cost me at least that much to park at the airport." And so Uber knows how long it takes me to get there. They know the traffic. The airline knows my PNR information. They know which gate I'm going out of, if I'm going out of DFW, which terminal. So if things change, they can give me just-in-time delivery, all this type of thing. But the way we're tracking and getting our fees off the TNCs for many of us won't work, at least the way it currently works, if the airlines buy in bulk, because that geofence that we're using is based on app-based ridership. If your app-based ridership goes away because now it's in your ticket that American, in this case, has contracted, you're missing out that revenue now. You have no idea if that vehicle coming on the airport is a TNC provider or just another private vehicle. So as we go forward, and as airports look to monetize the curb, and the airlines look to take advantage of that, what are you doing about your curbs? What are you doing to maybe as an airport take that opportunity before the airline may take that opportunity? And already we hear JetBlue is buying in bulk for TNCs. The other thing that's going on is the conversation about autonomous vehicles. And what happens, Roddy, when autonomous vehicles get here and we don't know how it will manifest? Will they go home? Will they park? Will they go pick somebody up? And if they don't park, we're losing more and more revenue that way. How do we insulate against that? So already we're having conversations about how we take care today about charging all vehicles that come into our airport as a ready stream of cash. For instance, Iowa State University did a study in 2015 on the airports in the UK that were charging for pickups and drop-offs. And in this case, in 2015, London Heathrow, charging for pickups and drop-offs, made $15.4 million US just in 1 year for just pickups and drop-offs at London Heathrow. If you take that type of thinking and look at opportunities for, bad word, money grab, and you took it out to LA and you say you charge $2.50 for every vehicle entering the terminal or entering the terminal roadway, there's a potential for an excess of $40 million US in 2015 dollars for LA charging every vehicle. Now, the only airport I know today that's doing that is DFW at a minimum charge of $2 or $3 a car going through DFW. But I can tell you today that we are meeting with airports, mid-size and large airports, that are looking at opportunities to provide a way to recoup costs from everyone using their roads, even if they're pass-throughs to go through airports or coming on the airport. So it may be a wave in the future, and it's also a protection against potential geofence issues and the autonomous vehicle where you really don't know, who to charge if you're not charging private vehicles. Things we have to think about as we look forward to where the money's coming from. And by the way, for that money, you don't have to ask the airlines for permission to use it. You don't have to go to the FAA and put in an application, because you're kind of printing money every day. So something to think about with the technology that goes with that. Now, if we looking forward, what's the passenger experience? We hear a lot of conversation about experiential. Have you heard experiential in your concessionaire comments? Does that ring a bell with you? Millennials, if you've been like me and sat through many presentations on what millennials and I guess what the follow-on generation zennials are looking for, and that is experiences. And they are spending 78% more money of their money on experiences than they are on buying things. They have FOMO. I'd never heard of FOMO before, the fear of missing out. And they would rather spend their money on skydiving or backpacking through Europe are traveling than buying a home or a car. And I still look in our airports today, and I see the vast think tank of great concessionaire thinking, but today we're still looking for 100% footfall through a duty-free when we come through security checkpoint, and trying to get that people to buy something as they go through. And while that's still probably a very solid way to leverage money out of our passengers' wallets, is it giving people the experiences that they're looking for? What might you put in an airport today as a concessionaire that provides experiences? Obviously, we have massages and things of that, but when I think of a lot of experiential type of opportunities, maybe we don't have quite enough of that yet, and maybe we don't know how to play that, which really goes through the conversation as we get into urban mobility. And my two fellow panelists here are going to speak a lot better than I will on urban mobility. But for me, part of urban mobility speaks to two things I've already talked about. One is the experience of getting from one place to another, not by vehicle. If you've watched the Uber Elevate video, you see them all looking down on the traffic and seeing everything they're passing up to get home in time. But there's a certain amount of chutzpah with saying, hey, you know what? I don't have to drive the car in that. And of course, price point's a big issue as well. But there's also the issue with urban mobility, and especially how it may play into our airports, or how you're going to generate revenue from it for your airport. Because does that work with geofence? Does that take away from your curbside congestion? Does that take away from your parking revenue? So as you look at it as a boon for activity at airports, and it gives a great activity for GA airports and opportunities that maybe we haven't seen in a very, very long time. I think the complexities are, what does it do to revenue generation outside of just leasehold, but also how does it affect your current non-aeronautical revenue? So the spaces for those, there's a lot of great things coming. I wonder about air mobility. Will it be like next gen, and maybe I won't live long enough to see it? Or will it be more like TNC's when they started, and several countries and cities and states in the U.S. said, no, you can't work here at the airport till we have an agreement. You don't have the right insurance and that type of thing to come through. But the groundswell of support for TNC's has made it very successful. Will urban air mobility be the same way and force some sort of governance that's still kind of gray in my mind to the less than 400-foot rule and how this all works out? So I'm going to be quiet because I've reached the end of my knowledge and hand it over to Gene.
Thanks, Roddy. And I'm now rolling into this, and that really set that up well, Roddy, of where we have been, where we're going, and what we're facing as far as and how we deal with those things, kind of similar to Uber and Lyft and how we dealt with that originally, and not on my airport, or we're not going to lose the revenue, and geofencing and different things that came into play. And now, Gene, if you can roll into the next.
Sure. So, again, my name is Gene Reindel. I'm with HMMH. Most of you that know of us as an environmental firm. My specialty is aviation noise. I started out at the Boeing company in their noise engineering laboratory, testing airplanes and certifying airplanes. So why am I up here talking about urban air mobility? I've been going to conferences on unmanned aerial systems and urban air mobility, autonomous type things for a few years now. And the reason I am up here is because I'm convinced, and have been for years, that there's going to be an issue that this that this industry needs to be aware of, and that is the annoyance factor or social acceptability of these new systems. And I'm a firm believer that urban air mobility is coming, and probably sooner than we will be ready for it. So there are 3 missions that the vehicle manufacturers are preparing for, and these are all using vertical takeoff and landing type of vehicles. And so the 3 missions that they have is inner city, where you're just staying within the city, flying from point to point, that probably it has some congestion issues. It takes you a while to drive between those 2 points within the city. Those are going to be, right now they're thinking electric vehicles, so eVTOL they're called, or electric vehicle takeoff and landing. Then there is another mission that they're designing for, and that's to get people from the airport that they flew into to the city. And they see that as more like a super shuttle type of service, but again, air mobility, so using maybe a hybrid of electric and fuel. And probably be passengers on the order, oh, first of all, for the going back to the inner city, probably still be like 1 to 4 passengers like your typical Uber car has now. And then going from the airport to the city, they're looking at maybe 10 to 15 or 8 to 12, somewhere in that range. And then the third mission is actually going from city to adjacent city or adjacent suburban area, something like that, to where that's a little bit longer distance and probably more people, and so that would probably be all fuel at that point. But again, all three of these missions are meant to be vertical takeoff and landing, so that you don't have to use a runway to get your liftoff or landing. And so, again, why is a noise person up here speaking about urban air mobility? And I think it is really going to be about annoyance, the annoyance factor. And we've done a lot at HMMH over the last 3 or almost 4 decades of really dealing with annoyance. I will say that early on, you probably all remember the 727s operating in the sky, or even the 707s before that. They were loud, and they were loud for great distances around the airport. And now where we've come to is the planes are much quieter, there's more of them, but we're getting people annoyed at much lower levels. In fact, the noise levels of aircraft, except for really close to the airport now, are probably about the same as the ambient noise level, or even less than the ambient noise level. People still hear them though, and that's going to be the case with urban air mobility. I heard some of the manufacturers or people that want to implement this, like Uber Elevate, say, well, as long as we get the noise levels of these vehicles to be less than the ambient noise in which they're flying, we're fine. And I would challenge that. I would challenge that, because we're seeing in places that people, as long as you can hear them, to draw your attention to them and to see these vehicles flying, there is going to be a certain percentage of people that'll find that quite annoying, regardless of the noise level. So yes, we need to talk about noise, but we really need to start focusing on annoyance. And I would take that to our airports today anyway, is that we really need to start turning away from thinking we have a noise problem to really having an annoyance problem. I would bet that most complaints at your airport in terms of noise right now are much further out than your 65 day-night average sound level contour. And so I would venture to say that those complaints are really talking now about annoyance, because they're not really super close to the airport. They're a little further out. The aircraft are probably within the range of what other noise sources are in their neighborhoods, but they still find them annoying. So urban air mobility, again, I am here to say that I do truly believe it's coming, and probably sooner than we're expecting it to be here. And it's a collaboration. Airports do have a role. I want to send out a message essentially that you need to start preparing for it. Do you have a facility, or do you have facilities in place, or can you get them in place in very short order? Because I do think that the model is going to be more like the TNC model, where they're just going to figure out a way to get through the regulation and really start operating before we're really ready for them, and they're going to push the governments, and it's also going to be not just federal, but it's going to be on a city level in this case, because we're talking about urban air mobility, which the FAA, depending on who you talk to, but some there say, well, that's not going to be our problem. Maybe we just release a certain airspace. There's been talk, like Roddy said earlier, below 400 feet maybe, where we just give that and let the cities deal with it. And so now the airports are in the middle here, not only with the federal government, but also the cities. And I want to use that as a segue to turn it over to Brittany.
And thanks, Gene. And that's kind of what drives the necessity to have this discussion and make sure that we have a liaison, and Brittany is a good friend to have, I think, for all of us, cities or counties, to be able to have that ability to communicate with your city leaders and tie that together. So Brittany, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much. So on behalf of my 19,000 cities, we are glad to be here and talking to the aviation community about this issue. We believe that drones and unmanned aircraft are certainly going to become the next mode of transportation. And if you think about how long it's been since we've had a next mode of transportation, we're really overdue. And there's a lot that comes into this conversation. But I think the most important thing to just be aware of is that we are looking at not only a new form of transportation, but a major disruption to all of the models that are important to airports, that are important to our cities, and that certainly are part of the American backbone of our economy. Mobility as a service has changed a lot of the pieces of our puzzle that we're working with. And so from a city's perspective, we want to be prepared for this, and we also want to make sure that it's done in a safe way that also encourages the public good. And so you hear a variety of case studies in the news, and a lot of these are stemming out of our current integration pilot program with the FAA, where we have about 8 different cases across the country where they're doing expanded use case development in conjunction with their state and local partners or tribal partners. And it's been a fantastic learning experience, because in some ways we're doing what you may have heard out in Australia and Canberra and in the surrounding suburbs of that area. They've been doing drone delivery pilots and looking at how that is interacting with their local community, bringing up issues of noise and airport development and how that moves forward. And so for us, we are going to be looking to you in a lot of ways to really rethink what is an airport. Because as one of the mayors who sat on the original drone advisory committee to the FAA famously said now that drones are here, everywhere is an airport. Everywhere in my city is an airport. How are we going to look at this in a new way and think about what guardrails need to be put in place in order to productively have drone deliveries? Because we are seeing 2 really encouraging use cases just from the city spectrum. So I represent cities that are very, very, very small, and I represent New York City and LA and Dallas. And so one of the things that I think is really important to you, if you're maybe a member of the general aviation community, is that we see this as a potential overwhelming redevelopment opportunity for our smallest airports and for our most rural players. We're seeing ideas about how we deliver medicine, how we get life-saving equipment to folks quickly. You have companies like Flirty doing that. And it's been really impressive to see those rural use cases. But unfortunately, what most tech companies do, as we've learned in the scooter and bike share industry and TNCs, is that they go directly towards the most complex market, directly towards it. And they're looking to not only employ public assets as part of their beneficial use case for investors, but they're looking to do it very quickly. And so there's a lot that we need to be thinking about from that complex airspace use case, which I think many of you around this room understand that there could be very useful connections in major airport hubs where you think about how to get from that airport destination straight to downtown, where you're overcoming some of the congestion issues and other issues that impact folks. But one of the concerns that we have is that despite there being great use cases, we have not done a few things that are absolutely essential to this conversation. And I think that whether it's Jane Jetson saying, we've got to get these things, George, take care of this, like this is not good. or whether it's sort of Rosie the robot who's helping everyone. Sorry, I really was like having a great throwback moment when they started going on the Jetsons. Sorry. But it was that idea of, okay, so what questions should we be asking ourselves? How are we going to change what we are doing now? Which I think Roddy really gave us a good insight into. But how does this impact your business? And how does this impact the people that you are serving? Because I believe very strongly that right now, while FAA is going through their pilot process and we're working through the remote ID rules and we're trying to overcome some of the basic national security concerns that come with the use cases that we're looking at, now we need to be aware of how we're going to advise cities as airports. You all know how to zone an airport. You know what sort of risk assessments need to be had. You are aware of what would be ideal airport redevelopment areas in your towns. Those are all the types of things that I hope you're asking yourself, but I also hope that we're encouraging you to ask and to go home and talk to your cities about what their expectations are for how the airport will be engaged in this. We fully anticipate that managing this new and complex airspace will fully require your participation, but it also will pull us closer into a complex discussion of who is making decisions about the inputs and outputs. I will say that I'm glad to be a part of such a dynamic community that is already working and coding and looking at partnerships that make sense. But this is a community that has been absent in some of those discussions, and so I certainly hope that the contractors and the folks who are deploying new infrastructure are thinking about this space and thinking about how they talk to cities about it in the next few years. And so with that, I guess I'll say that we are on the cusp of reimagining a lot of our infrastructure at the city level, whether it's the input of TNCs or the output of the new drone space. We've put up a picture from NASA here that I think is very helpful in thinking through the city context and what that might mean, where drone ports might be, where new landing pieces might go. How will we ensure that the safety of our existing service is going to be upheld? We recently saw, if you remember last Christmas at Gatwick, we saw what can happen when drones are not able to be identified and we're not able to actually continue use of our airport services. We've saw, unfortunately, incidents at the Super Bowl. We've seen incidents above Fenway, Boston ballpark, and we continue to also really take in as a community what this is going to take to make this possible. And so yes, we're very much headed towards the Jetsons. I'll put myself in that camp, and that we very much believe that urban air mobility and some of these other concepts are going to be revolutionary. But we also need to be very clear about where Fred got it right, and how we actually make sure we continue to operate in the similar ways and provide that economic benefit that airports always have had to our nation's economy. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
One thing I forgot to mention, which is helps to show that in my mind that urban air mobility is coming sooner than we think. A lot of people have this conception that you need unmanned vehicles, unpiloted vehicles to do urban air mobility. Those are not, they're not tied together necessarily. Just like Uber and Lyft have all talked about, you know, eventually having autonomous vehicles, no drivers, and taking people from point to point. Yes, that's in the long-range plans, but urban air mobility is not going to wait for it to be unmanned. The vehicles they're designing today will have the capability to have a pilot, but also the ability to remove that pilot from the vehicle. So that's in their designs, is that they're not waiting on unmanned technology to be here in order to begin urban air mobility.
No, very good, Gene. And that kind of rolls right into, and I kind of got a question for the audience as far as, at Palo Alto, we have 2 transient operators operating out of the airport. One is Blade, and one is Vroom. a subsidiary of Airbus. And I just wonder how many in the audience have operations like that going out of their airport now? Wow, okay. It's the platform is what they're, where Blade is looking at whatever the solution is in the future, they can replace the helicopter with whatever that is. I think Vroom is a little more on a more refined. Airbus is going to come up with their solution is where that's going. So I think I'd just like to ask the panelists the question, next steps. How do we prepare ourselves to move forward? And unlike next gen, I think we all heard for so long, and we got to a point where we were like, oh, it's not coming, and then wham, it was there. It sounds to me like this is moving faster, as we've heard. So I'll just turn it over to you. What should we do? How should we handle this?
Before I directly answer that, I also want to state that urban air mobility is actually happening. I mean, Blade and Vroom are operating. Blade, I know, is taking people from JFK to Manhattan now. It's happening. And again, because people are not seeing that because they think we have to be unmanned in order to have these urban air mobility, it's happening. Fortunately for that particular route, it's all over water. And so I think public acceptance is greater. You have less people living under that. But next steps is really about, the discussions at the UAM conferences right now. So I've been attending these for a few years now. It wasn't until this year in Atlanta that the Aviation Week UAM conference happened that people were talking about implications of implementation of UAM, and they're really looking at society acceptance. They're really wanting airports, they're wanting cities, they're wanting people to really get behind this in order to promote it as being a good thing, something that can really help. There is also some miscommunication out there that urban air mobility is going to reduce congestion on the freeways. It's not going to do that. We're not talking about, 1 million operations a day in Los Angeles, because that's what it would have to take to reduce, the congestion on the freeways and the streets. This is just another mode of transportation. So what's next is really looking at figuring out first how to get the infrastructure in place, how to take advantage of existing infrastructure, look around your city, look around your airports to see what is available now for urban air mobility. Where can you have people or vehicles taking off and landing? I know people are looking at existing parking structures. They're looking at existing buildings that may already have a helipad on them. Things like that is what they're looking at, and so that's one of the first steps. But I've talked with Brittany quite a bit about this, but the social acceptance side, you don't want to get a black eye in implementing. Say Uber Elevate is the first to implement, maybe, whoever's the first. If something happens that goes really bad, society's not ready to accept this, it's going to really put the brakes on them perhaps, and there would then be more federal regulation to handle that. So that would be my take.
So I always thought UAM was unaccompanied minors. So like I said, this has been a very big learning experience for me. I think the biggest thing we have to prepare for is, and I'm a consultant, so I can't speak for airports, but from my side looking at the airports need to drive more rather than following as much. I think the airports stand to lose out by not taking the bull by the horn, so to speak. For instance, on the curbside monetization piece, if you don't do anything, somebody else will, and you'll lose that opportunity for that revenue. In preparing for the UAMs that are not unaccompanied minors, if you don't see that coming and take steps to get ready for that, whatever those steps may be, it will happen to you the way that somebody else wants it to happen to you. And we see that all the time And I feel like from the consultant side, I see more and more, we use the term innovation a lot these days, more and more willingness to be innovative, to take chances from our mid-size and smaller airports many times than I see in our large hub and CADX airports. And I'm not really sure why that is, but the old tried and true methods, we spend a lot of time talking about, wow, wouldn't it be great to be Changi and have a 40-foot waterfall and a hiking trail around it to where you can bring a gun and go hunting. That's not really happening there. But the type of things that people see other people do and want to do here, but it doesn't meet our model. We don't have the dwell time. We don't have the passengers for that type of thing. So looking at what we do in this country and what we are going to do to move forward, I think we need to take more ownership as an industry in what we want to move forward to and not let other people apply it to us. And those other people I'm referring to in this case are the airlines, because they've done a very good job since 2007 of making a lot of money off the backs of what happens at airports. Not only the fact that they land and pick up their passengers there. I think there's great opportunity for us to step forward now and be more involved in defining our future as opposed to just participating in it.
So I sort of alluded to this, but I think if you're interested in this area and what it means, the very first thing to do is to become a little bit more aware of what's happening with the pilots and what we're learning from that, because I do think that is the first test case that we're going to understand how different models might develop, and also consider, where you fit in that model, which model fits for you. And so the other piece, of course, is I hope that you would take the time to really think about what your airport's transportation needs are. We've spent a lot of time trying to get service in and out of airports in a productive way, mostly from a transit capacity standpoint. And that's an option in today's society. But there are a lot of things that you all probably have utilized in terms of strategies, but one of those that I think is very impactful right now is a transportation improvement program that allows for, say, Uber fares to be tagged, or TNC fares to be tagged at airports in order to pay for that transit development, in order to pay for that maybe new Elevate and eVTOL construction, something small, something that makes an impact but gets you out there in terms of providing that service in a quick way. And then beyond the capturing of revenue and thinking about how it's best positioned to actually help your full operations is to start looking at, are you being an advisor to the new small airports that are going to be developed within your city, within your town, within your county? And I think that's actually the place where I would say your regional transportation planners would love to hear from you about how that connection should happen and what are ideal locations for them to start thinking about updating their zoning to allow and accommodate for that service. Because that's going to be a key advisor role that you could take. That would certainly help our planners get ahead of this. So your MPO is sort of, or your rural transportation planning organization, whoever takes that role in your community, or if it's your city transportation department, all of those are great folks to go talk to about what that zoning could be in the future.
So question is UAM going to be a landside component, or is it going to be an airside component?
So I think we were talking about
Somebody
this
said
earlier.
both, I think.
Gene, do you want to go down that?
So I think the answer is yes. And I think it's something that airports need to think about. And it's going to depend on what you can accommodate as well as what the providers want to provide. And remember that people want to go from point A to point B. Airports don't do that. Airports take them to some place, but A and B is usually like their home to an attraction or, a business meeting at a certain location downtown back to home. I mean, that's point A and point B. The airports are in the middle of that, and it is important to think of this as how is it best to get people from where they are to where they need to be? What role do airports play in that, and how can we be more of a involved in full transportation within the jurisdictions?
Okay, so with that, and I guess my question from an airport manager's point of view is it grant eligible? And what I'm talking about, I don't know if anybody knows that. I see Lori back there. But when we plan for this and when we start looking at this from our infrastructure to our Part 150s, and we start looking at that and we look at how we're going to do that, is there a way that we can prepare when we do our ALP updates and start looking and kind of visioning for the future? Is that something that we could plan for now or begin to plan for?
How come everybody's looking at me? I don't know that I'm the best one to answer that question. To me, I think a lot of that's going to depend on who's the owner of what we're doing. If we wind up and see some of our national carriers get into this market or brand it, with a one-ticket ride, I think the conversation's a lot different than if we have a bunch of individual entities coming in providing service, because I'm having a hard time seeing a lot of grants right now for this. But I don't know. I think you guys should answer that more than I should.
So I'll just say that so we finished the FAA bill, 5-year FAA bill. There were a lot of indications around airport planning and how that's going to move forward. But most importantly, there were several drone provisions. Some of them are around planning. Many of them are more geared towards the high level, what is the strategy, and accomplishing some of the most basic of tasks that need to be accomplished in order to let this industry thrive. But I would say the Senate just dropped their transportation package from the Environment and Public Works Committee. Depending on how closely you follow Congress, that's my day job. This is a big move in the right direction for a lot of things. The Commerce Committee is next up to look at that draft and to really assess where this would be. Any drone legislation, any autonomous vehicle legislation, any research and development, it's going to flow through commerce. And so we have an upcoming opportunity, I think, as airports and as cities to really look for those grants out of Congress and to remind them how important connecting our transportation modes is going to be in the future. And so we certainly would be looking to do that as part of the National League of Cities. And I'm sure to bother your government affairs folks who represent you quite well to make sure that we're doing that. But this is something where partnerships may be more early and pliable than federal grants. And so you ought to consider how you might work within that structure to create these forward-looking partnerships. And I would just say one of the things as cities that we've learned quite quickly, I don't know how many of you have seen scooters and been in a major hub city in a while. Anyone here seen or rode a scooter? All right, a few of you. Okay, great. So in markets where this has taken off, it's become an entire discussion. It's also it's very similar to this discussion because it's a tech-fueled, investor-run operation. And so one of the things that we are learning as cities is how we can code and respond with information to assess and allow for as many vendors as possible to engage in our structure. And you look at cities like LA that went from essentially having no scooters to having 12 million rides in a single year. 12 million. And so we are looking at this from a city perspective as how do we apply the lessons we've learned with scooters into this new space. And we're certainly preparing for the back end of how we regulate that in a way that is both friendly to competition, but also very much driven towards capturing the value equation and making sure that we are continuing to create guardrails of safety, which is ultimately our job as cities.
Okay, and I think we'll just go to questions in the audience, if that's okay with the group. I thought Mark had a question back there, but he's... Mark, did you have a question? Okay.
You know, I'm going to go a little bit beyond what you guys are talking about and go back to the George Jetson model, right? So these things that are coming out as UAMs could represent the next generation of GA aircraft at your airports. Because if Uber is, they're talking about producing thousands of these vehicles, right? So suddenly the private owner can say, hey, look, I can buy an aircraft that can go 140 knots. I can take off from a vertiport. I can go wherever I want to go and land, right? So suddenly we go from just a Bonanza or a Cirrus into this very exotic new vehicle that's almost autonomous to fly, right? It flies itself. You program it where you want to go. And what we're seeing is the very beginnings of this. And they'll have a dramatic change and shift to the way our airports operate. Because once they become affordable, you know, this is a private entity building these things. Private people are going to buy them. They're going to start operating them. And we need to be aware that we're going to have facilities to handle this kind of aircraft. And the vertiports they're looking at building with 1,000 operations a day in the middle of a city, the acceptance thing isn't going to be very good. But our airports are already set up for handling air traffic. So they're going to come to us first. And if our association, or the American Association of Airport Executives, doesn't get engaged in this issue, it's going to roll over us. So there's a lot we need to do. NATA, GAMA, everybody's jumping into the game. The airports are still sitting on the sideline. So that's all. I'm sorry I'm making a statement, but I'm seeing things happening into the future that we need to make accommodations for now so that we're not left behind.
No, very good. And that was the reason for bringing this topic up and discussing it, because I think it's our job as airport representatives and to work on this, work with our cities and counties, and reach out. We got a question. Joe?
You know, there was one thing on the GA airport side as well that I don't think we talked about up here. We talked about earlier is a great propensity for our GA airports out in our communities. You know, people got to go catch these somewhere, and it may not be built specifically for a UAM site. We're better to have a kiss and ride for a UAM than at a GA airport, you know, going into. So there's a great opportunity to really change what GA airports do today and how people see them.
Yeah, one last thing I would add to that discussion is that when I totally agree, Bob, with what you just said, that airports haven't yet gotten involved, especially the GA airports, which I think is where a lot of the infrastructure would be coming from. But at the Aviation Week UAM conference earlier this year in Atlanta, there was one airport in attendance. There were hundreds of people there. There was one airport in attendance. So we do, which is part of the reason I talked to Andy about this session, is that we need to start to get the word out. Airports need to get more involved. They need to understand these operations, or what we think are going to be these operations, so that they can prepare for it.
So a couple of observations and a couple of questions. One, to some degree, let me start with a question. Do we have any idea, and I realize we're very early on, but what kind of altitudes we're talking about, or elevations we're talking about, that these potentially UAMs will be flying at? Has there been any discussion about that, any of you?
The discussion I have heard, because FAA, again, is trying to, I mean, just the picture that Bob presented just now, right, with all these vehicles around, FAA doesn't see themselves as being the people managing that at that point. And so they're looking at possibly determining a flight level in which, if you operate under that and not near an airport, then you can autonomously operate. And I've heard talk about 400 feet, but it hasn't yet been determined, and that's some of the discussion that's happening is actually between the cities and the FAA as to, you know, how we promote this going forward. Who's really in charge?
Well, and I, like you, think that this is going to be, and Bob also, that this is going to be a really big part of our society in the future. And I think that one of the challenges of the overall regulation and efficient operation of it is sort of how you develop these routes, because people are going to want to go wherever they want to go without, you know, relative restriction. And then you've got the Amazon delivery, which are going to be all over the place because there's already UPS and the other on track that are throughout the neighborhoods. And then you've got the guy that's going to be bringing me pizza and beer to my house, or I say the guy, but it's the autonomous vehicle that's going to be actually, because I really do believe that there's going to be a lot of this, and that's going to be the challenge of determining the routes, determining the flight levels, and determining that. And then it's a matter of, yes, I think some of it does make sense, especially the longer range, like the inner city trips, for example, city to city, or metro to metro. But then maybe it makes sense for much of the other to be at transit centers outside of airport, you know, terminal airspaces, those kinds of things. There's going to be a lot of it, and it's going to be complex, and we should be involved.
So with that, I think I'll roll into just a quick video just kind of to underscore Joe's point, and also what a small package delivery company is going to has out there as a concept right now. So that kind of, I mean, the amount of traffic and coordination and all that's going to go into that, I don't know about this one. So I was on vacation, got in, flight was 2 hours late, got in last Tuesday night to SFO. Was right around rush hour. And hit the Uber app, 45-minute wait just to go to Millbrae, just to go out the other side of the freeway. So I'm like, okay, I'll jump a cab. So cab, same price, $12, get across the freeway. I always feel bad about that. The poor cab driver that waited, that thought he was going to get the fare into the city. Tipped him well. Well, anyways, I had a conversation with one of the representatives from Vroom about that exact experience. And the comment was that cab platform, that whole area, the vision is that, you know, you would have been picked up and delivered to an airport like San Carlos or Palo Alto, and then your last mile or two of your leg eventually would be probably a ground transportation of another unmanned UAV or so yeah. So, Mark?
So more is always better, and I want to talk a little bit about Bob's comments there in terms of airports engaging. There are some aspects that the airport industry has been engaged in, and I just wanted to share for the group, but again, more is always better. On the Drone Advisory Committee from the FAA, 35-member Drone Advisory Committee, there are 2 airport representatives, CEO of Reno, also the CEO of Los Angeles. There is a ACI is working directly with AUVSI on a Blue Ribbon Task Force, and there's about 8 airport executives on that committee working on drone detection and mitigation solutions. AAE also has a conference, an annual conference, 2.5-day long conference every year for the last 4 years. This year it will be in November in Salt Lake City. And then there is a AAA committee the OSPEM, which has a working group specifically for UAS working group discussions. So not arguing that we couldn't do more. I'm just saying if people want to get involved, those are several aspects that they can get involved with. Representing airports, we would welcome the help. Scotty and I participate on those calls frequently. So,
Thanks, Gene. Very good information there.
I have a question on the way over. How are we going to know that we can trust the business models that they say they're doing versus what they might be doing otherwise? So a package delivery network could also be persistent surveillance.
So when you talk to the FAA, they're going to tell you that privacy is not in their scope of work. And that is a fair point. However, it is not entirely clear how many levels of interaction it's going to take to handle some of those concerns for the public. And I do think there's going to be a federal, state, and local perspective on that privacy issue. And we continue to be very concerned that public acceptance and proper guardrails are going to be essential to actually allowing this industry to take off. And if we're not paying attention to those issues as local electeds, we are going to be in a lot of, we're going to end up with a lot more questions than we have answers to. And so we're getting ahead of that. But at the same time, there's not going to be a clear case in point for how we manage those distinctions unless we start actually conversing about how this all works as a network. Which is part of the complexity choice that I think you're bringing up is, are we truly embracing this, and are we looking at it from all of its complexities and setting it up to succeed in our current environment? And I think there's going to be continued conversations on that. So definitely stay tuned, but know that there is not one answer.
So my question is, you guys sort of indicated or hinted that, GA airports might be, an ideal location for, some of this to start at. Well, several of the most GA airports with $150,000 a year in entitlement struggle just to, be able to maintain their airfields as they are, and, just fund projects and keep up with general maintenance and stuff. So, I guess I see the idea of them coming up with the money to fund a project like that may be infeasible in a lot of cases. So do you guys anticipate, before, and it may be a while before the FAA catches up or, is willing to start issuing grants for those type of projects. So do you see like the, Uber Elevates and those companies being willing to invest in that development, if there's not another funding mechanism there?
I can start. So that was a major discussion point at the conference in Atlanta that I referenced earlier. There would be a much greater cost to the providers of these services if they had to build their own infrastructure from the ground up. So they are truly looking at using aerial photography to find places that they could operate out of. And the three things that surface the most are the parking garages, the helipads, and then also GA airports. And so I would see it as a partnership. I would see them coming to you to partner in this and probably sharing that cost, because if they're to change something that part of the infrastructure is already there, it's a less cost to them.
And unlike upkeeping a runway, the cost of these structures is minimal. And that's been part of the selling point to investors, is that the infrastructure required is minimal. It takes coordination, allowance, and the FAA to go through their process. At that point, we need to figure out, if that model is not true, then it's time to talk about how we structure that for the future. But I think now is the right time to be having partnership conversations.
And I'm going to throw in saying they need what you have. Just flying over and looking at greenfield sites doesn't give them the infrastructure they need to do that. And, this is a private type of operation, so I think, it's a great opportunity for you to look and start projecting if this were to take off and if they're near the people that would use this service where these GA airports are, then you've got marketability that they need, and that arrangement, that not revenue neutral, that for-profit arrangement, that's something you need to think about, because I think that's part of their buy-in cost, because they'll definitely get their cost from the passenger. This is business.
Yeah, and to add to that, just a conversation with Vroom just last week, the comment was made, they will have a location in LA. They will have a location in San Francisco. And they're not talking about specific spots right now. They're looking. And I think that's going on with all of them.
So my name is Mary Miller, and I work for a company called Signature Flight Support. And I thought I'd maybe offer a little bit more insight as to what we're doing as a partner with Uber in their Uber Copter venture, which was announced at the Uber Elevate Summit in Washington, D.C. about 3 weeks ago. So service started on July the 9th, and it started from the 34th Street helipad to JFK. And it's advertised, it's now an app, and it's only for Diamond members in Uber. They have apparently 93 million uses of their app every month throughout the world. And what they're able to do is, through their technology, is look and see the highest traffic, because it's car traffic. And they determined that in New York City, the average ride to JFK was just under 2 hours. Just under 2 hours, and the price tag in an Uber SUV or Black was approximately $165 to $185. So what they did was they decided to start the Uber Copter, and now it will show up as a drop-down box if the ride to JFK exceeds a certain dollar amount, call it $150, then you will then get another drop-down offer, and it's Uber Copter. And the Uber Copter price rate right now is between $200 and $225. So it's only being offered for $40 more than the Uber, SUV, and it's an 8-minute ride instead of just under 2 hours to get to JFK. And when you get to JFK, well, then you're landing at the General Aviation facility there, so that's the way that's working right now. But what they're doing, and I think the point is they are proving their concept. And their concept is, with current structure, infrastructure, whether it's a heliport, whether it's a GA facility somewhere on an airport that already exists, with an already existing flight path that is predetermined by the FAA by a helicopter service, and the helicopter company they have selected is a company called Helinet. And it's the Helinet pilots that are flying the aircraft. And then at the heliport, you will see people in Uber uniforms, but they're Signature Flight Support employees. So people that already know the marshalling signals, the safety components that are in the business already. So I think more than anything, it's a scenario where it is here, and it's, I see the Jetsons, I saw the Jetsons when I was a kid, so I'm now aging myself as well. But I never really thought we'd see this in our lifetime, and now here it is. It's upon us, and I think that the vehicle operators of the eVTOLs, they're hopeful that they'll get the aircraft certified by 2023, which is not that far away from now. But I know that from an infrastructure perspective, from an airport perspective, something to think about is the amount of electricity and charging, and that's a challenge right now, is the electricity and how much it costs to run the power to the top of a 30-story building, the top of a 5-story parking garage, or just in the ground. So,
well, and if you talk to the current electric vehicle manufacturers across the country, they have the same problem. and how we build in the infrastructure that we're going to need to switch fuel consumption sources has been a major topic of conversation with Congress. In fact, in the Senate bill, we are going to see an electric vehicle charging infrastructure grant program for designated corridors. Something similar could be done for possible airports that qualify on strategic corridors in the future.
Jorge, did you?
Good afternoon. To Mary's point, I actually went to New York and I witnessed some of that operation. I was taking a charter from Queens to Brooklyn, and on the way to Brooklyn, I saw a seaplane landing on the East River. And what it was, it's a company called Blade. So what they were doing is they were flying from New York City and taking people to the Hamptons, the East Hamptons, I believe. And that's the company Blade is basically a helicopter company. They're venturing into other business, and they're doing the same as Uber Elevate. They're taking people from 34th Street to JFK. And I know for a fact that Blade is advertising on our area of the country in Southern California. And during the Coachella Festival, they were taking people from LAX and from Santa Monica to Coachella. And I've actually spoken with the owners of Lyft, and I believe that they will be looking to operate out of the Southern California airports. So anybody in that region, just be ready. They'll be here sooner than later.
No, very good point, Jorge. And we have the same. We have Blade operating as transient out of Palo Alto, and very similar to what Mary was describing, we have Vroom operating through an FBO in that same way, would represent, with the uniform type of thing, is that, they brand it. So, yeah, we got about 4 more minutes, I think, here, so we'll take any other questions.
To add on to that also is that we have an aviation day every year in Sacramento for California, and Blade was there. It wasn't, it was easy to figure out why they were there, because it gives them that face-to-face with some of the politicians to bend their ear and, get their attention. But yeah, Blade was there, so they're certainly doing, while they started in New York, servicing the Hamptons and JFK to the city, they're certainly looking at other major metropolitan areas.
All right, I think that wraps things up here. We're starting to run out of time. I just want to thank our panelists. I really appreciate your time. And
Jetson. His boy Elroy.
Just so everybody knows. Go ahead, Chris.
Oh no, you got me beat me to the punch. So now we're going to go on a break. Please go spend some time with our vendors that are out there, our exhibitors. We'll have another raffle. We're going to be on break for the next 30 minutes. We'll expect everyone back at 15 after 3.